Grace and peace, beloved. Grace and peace. If you can hear me on Zoom, just type in grace and peace. If you can hear me on Facebook, just type in grace and peace. If you can hear me on YouTube, just type in grace and peace. We're so glad you're with us for this special edition of teaching in conjunction with the BTC Center, a 501c3 out of the Homewood neighborhood, a special teaching series on personal and public health. We welcome all those who are from Baptist Temple in Pittsburgh and vicinity, and we welcome all those who are from both near and far. We pray blessings upon you and thank you for sharing with us. There's still time now, if you will, to invite others. And we encourage you to do so. So tag someone, text someone, go get someone, tell them Pastor Lyde said, come and get you, because this is a series about personal and public health that you don't want to miss. We have as our specially invited guest, Dr. Michael Forbes, MD, who is both a pediatric intensivist, researcher, and physician, and professor who is a diehard Steeler fan, but who is at the Akron Children's Hospital in Akron, Ohio. With that being said, before we turn things over to Dr. Forbes, I want to set the tone a little bit because this is a partnership between the church and a community 501c3. So this is our effort to connect some dots, to be sure that on one hand, the church is seeking to address personal and public health issues, but as well to bring in the expertise of those who have information that is more than worthwhile for us to know. With that being said, allow me to set the table a bit for this series and talk a little bit from the book of 3 John, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. And there we find these words according to the New King James. The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. For I rejoiced greatly when brethren came and testified of the truth that is in you, just as you walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. And for a study emphasis, I just want to land on verse 2. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. For just a minute or two before we hand things over to Dr. Forbes, I want to lift up the importance of our personal health and our public health. In this short passage, I want you to take notice of first the sender of this letter. We know from our study this is John, but he is known as and referred to as an elder, someone who has a position of leadership, of pastoral leadership over churches. And so as he writes this letter, he comes in that role and position. He comes with the perspective of someone who has stewardship of service and leadership over the flock. And he writes in particular, notice, the sender does, to a special recipient, Gaius. And I want you to notice this importantly because this makes this letter, this epistle, this pastoral love letter, if you will, it has someone's name on it. That means it's particular. I share this with you in a real sense because tonight, the leaders of our congregation, as well as the board of the BTC Center and many concerned people in our community, we want you to feel particularly that we're concerned about your personal health and our personal health. This letter of 3rd John reminds us that there's not only a sender with regards to information and care, but we pray tonight that this teaching lands on your ears, lands on your mind, and lands in your spirit, because it's been designed particularly for you. He not only sends the letter to Gaius, who he loves in truth, but he does so in love. And this is what he says. The sender sends this letter to a recipient and he prays for a blessing. And here's where we now begin to launch and hand things over to Dr. Forbes. He says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health." Tonight, as we venture into this special edition, as we seek to address both personal and public health, I want you to keep in mind that this scripture is a reminder that we not only want to know about what it means to be in good health, but we want to prosper in our health. The word prosperity, if you will, the word prosper here comes from a Greek word that at its root means hodos in Greek, which we translate as way or journey. It's similar to where we get the word exodus. And what am I saying? What I'm saying essentially is, beloved, that this is a time and a moment in which the journey of health becomes important. We've got to start somewhere and we've got to stay on the journey. So tonight, we are grateful to have as our special guest Dr. Michael Forbes, MD. And he is, as I mentioned earlier, a pediatric and adolescent intensivist. He is a physician and executive at the Akron Children's Hospital in Akron, Ohio. He focuses now on unraveling the complexities of health services delivery for critically ill infants, children, and young adults. He is also the interim Noah Miller Chair of Pediatric Medicine at Akron Children's Hospital, as well as a professor and chair of the Department of Pediatrics at the Northeast Ohio Medical University. His recent efforts have focused on the integration of the myriad of clinical and administrative data sets to gain additional insights into systems of care across the entire continuum from primary care to recovery after hospitalization, as well as the impact of pediatric critical illness on families and communities. Not only did he receive his bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of Pittsburgh, but he also received his doctorate from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. And thereafter, he did his residency and became the chief resident at the Children's Hospital of UPMC in Pittsburgh. He is married to Dr. Yolanda Moore Forbes since 1986. They were married in the Hill District. They have 2 adult children scientists. And I did double check Pittsburgh. He still waves the terrible towel. He's the Steeler fan. So I'm going to ask all those on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, if you're calling in, I want you to join me now in welcoming our guest for tonight, Dr. Michael Forbes, who will lead us in this teaching on public health. As he unmutes himself, please greet him with a hand clap and a welcome. Thank you, Dr. Forbes.
Thank you. Wow, Reverend Lau, thank you so much for that very heartwarming introduction. Thank you for the word. Thank you for level setting. And as you said, setting the table. I want to thank you for this invitation. Executive Pastor Denise Walker for the invitation, and grace and peace to the community at Baptist Temple Church. You've already gone over my bio, so I don't think I need to review that. But I will point out that when it comes to public health, I've learned that public health is about private choices. And there are certain aspects of public health that are understood by everyone. And there are certain aspects of public health that are not understood. And I'm hoping that through this series, this evening at least, we'll start talking about COVID and the importance of personal choices. But I want to make a point as a pediatrician and as a dad and as a husband, that the reason that it's important for you to take control of your health and understand your health today is not because necessarily of what it means for your health today. It's for what it means in 2030. If you have high blood pressure, the reason you take your medications every day is not so that you can keep your blood pressure low today. It's so that you can prevent heart attack and stroke before 2030. And so we also know that your current health, the state of your current health is in large part based on the choices we've made over the past 10 years. Right? So your weight, your cholesterol, your blood sugar, all of those things that you might monitor are the sum total of all of the choices that you've made over the past 10 years, at least. And so with that as the backdrop, I want to dive into what we're dealing with today, which is another outbreak. In fact, it's not just an outbreak or an epidemic. It's a pandemic. It's a global pandemic that has infected tens of millions and has killed millions upon millions. And so I want to talk about COVID and what that means to us. And hopefully by the end of this, it'll make a lot more sense to you about how we are all connected. And to go back to something that Pastor Lyde spoke to, we are really compelled. If you're a Christian, you're familiar with the Bible. Frankly, if you're a person of faith, you understand the charge to love one another. And so this really gives us all an opportunity to love one another. I'm going to share my screen, and let's see. Give me 1 second here. So you should be seeing my first slide. Let's go ahead and dive right into this, and then we'll have a question and answer period afterwards. Most of you, when you were learning about microbiology in high school and college, you got what you got and you moved on. I'm going to spend a little more time reviewing that, because for many people it's been a long time, and for most people they frankly don't care. I get it. But for the purposes of understanding COVID, you really have to get this refresher, this primer on microbiology and all of the bugs that are around us that can make us sick. And because, I'm an academician and researcher, I love taking and giving giving quizzes rather than taking them. I'm going to give a pop quiz. Hopefully you guys will do okay. You don't have to share your results. You don't have to share your answers. Pastor Lyle's not going to broadcast it for everybody that some of y'all got an F. Hopefully nobody gets an F. And by the end of it, we're going to learn something. And then I'm going to turn a little bit to clinical trials and how we develop vaccines, and the reason I've composed the brief talk today before we get into the question and answer is I think these are some of the areas where there's been some misunderstanding, controversy, misinformation, and myths that have really allowed this pandemic to start wherever it started, and we'll get into that in a moment. But here we are in the 20th month or so of this pandemic. We're almost 80 weeks into this. And we have allowed, by our choices, getting back to public health again, by our choices, we have actually allowed this highly unstable alien invasion to mutate to the point where we are now dealing with wave after wave after wave. And again, I'll give you some personal experience with this last year about what we dealt with and how it is so different this year. It is angrier. than it was last year, because it has kind of parkoured off of people, bouncing off of people, mutating and transforming into something that's even more deadly than it was last year, believe it or not. And that's because of our choices. So let's go. So when it comes to dealing with bacteria, viruses, we'll talk about all of the different forms of microbes that are out there. These things are in the air we breathe, right? They're on your flat surfaces, they're on your skin. We know that germs are everywhere. But the life cycle of the bacteria or the virus or whatever we're dealing with, let's stick to viruses because we're talking about COVID, is you have to be exposed. You either touch it, or you breathe it in, or someone sneezes on you and you don't have a choice, or they've sneezed and they've put it on their hands and they touch a doorknob and then you touch it because you didn't know, and now you've touched your face because your nose is itching and now you're exposed. Now, just because you're exposed doesn't mean you'll necessarily get infected. You may not have had that much virus on that doorknob, and so you have natural immunity in your skin, actually, which is a pretty potent barrier to lots of different bugs that are out there. And if you don't have a very angry bug, or you don't have enough of that bug, your skin basically neutralizes it. No big deal. So you can get exposed, but you don't have to be infected. Now, when you get infected, specifically when we're talking about viruses, the virus binds to whatever part of your body it binds to. All the viruses are a little bit different, and then they use your biology. This is a hostile takeover. The virus goes into, let's say for COVID, it goes into your nostrils. It binds to the mucous membranes in your nostrils, and then it enters the cells of your nostrils and uses the biology, uses the biologic machinery to mass produce more viruses. That grosses you out, it should, but it happens all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's how viruses make you sick. And as they hijack your cellular biology, that makes you sick because it drains your energy, it releases toxins, and it makes you sick. That is an infection. And that's all a part of this infection and replication cycle. So as the virus reproduces over and over and over and over, hijacking your biology, now it makes you contagious. And you are able to spread it. And that way the virus continues long after you're sick and better. The virus has gone on to your friends, your families, your neighbor, your church congregation, all the people at Giant Eagle, all the people at Heinz Field. Wherever you go, you are a transmitter. Now, let's get a little bit more nuanced. Not everyone who gets infected and is being used by the virus to replicate has symptoms. And let's face it, if I was a virus and I wanted to infect someone and continue, I don't want that person dead. Because if they're dead, I can't make any more viruses. Make sense? And so the majority of the people who are infected by viruses never, ever have symptoms. They're just used, they mass produce virus, and they transmit, and you have no idea that your biology has been hijacked and you've been used as a virus transmitter. You've been used as a virus factory. Is that clear? I can't see everybody nodding. I can see a couple of people giving me amens. So that's really, really important. And so I have friends and family who'll say, well, Mike, I don't get the flu shot because I've never had the flu. If you've been on this call, you've had the flu, right? Well, put it another way. The flu had you. It infected you and it replicated and you were never sick, and it used you to create more flu viruses and transmit to other people. Does this make sense? I hope it makes sense, because again, this biology 101. This is basic biology. So what do we know about COVID-19? The problem with COVID-19 is a lot of problems, but with lots of debate, there's lots of controversy, there's lots of conspiracy. I want to focus on the facts and our current state. And I really want to focus on what we know. Hopefully you're not looking at this on a tiny phone because it's even harder to understand it. But let's talk about viruses. On the very, very far left, far right on your screen is a particle that is less than 10 microns. just to the left of that particle is a red blood cell, which is about 7 microns, okay, 1,000th of a meter or millionth of a meter. And then here is another particle that's less than 2.5 microns. And now you're down to 1 micrometer, not a millimeter, a micrometer. So that's a millionth of a meter. That's about the size of a bacteria. And then 60 to 140 nanometers, okay? Nanometers, that's 10 to the negative 9th meters, is where SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus. Yeah, so some of you are getting really close to your phones and your computers because it's really, really tiny, okay? It is in the air we breathe. And so I've already shared with you how this very, very tiny organism, this alien invader, is able to get into your mucous membranes, get on your hands, get on flat surfaces, and just really bounce from one person to another, really because of how it does what it does. Viruses are much harder to treat than bacteria. We have DNA viruses or deoxyribonucleic acid types of viruses, and we also have RNA viruses. Whether it's an RNA virus or a DNA virus, the way that it does its duty is the same. It infects you, it takes over your cellular machinery, and it makes more viruses. DNA viruses includes like herpes viruses. We've all heard of herpes viruses. Smallpox, which had an 80% mortality back in the day. Imagine 80% of the people who were infected died from smallpox. We've gotten rid of smallpox, right? Anyone know anyone who has smallpox? No, because vaccines eliminated smallpox. There are no more cases of smallpox ever again. Adenoviruses, which we still get, they can make you pretty sick, can give you pink eye. Anyone who's had pink eye has had an adenovirus. Papillomaviruses can also give you warts on your skin, warts on mucous membranes, and so on. But I'm not as worried. I mean, DNA viruses are a problem. RNA viruses are a real problem because one of the issues with RNA viruses is they are very, very, very unstable. And what that means is you can, if one person is infected with an RNA virus, 100 people later, it's already mutated a number of times. It's just not stable genetic material. And so influenza virus, as we know, is an RNA virus. Hepatitis C is an RNA virus. We've all heard of Ebola virus. You remember Ebola virus back in 2014. And by the way, Ebola virus also has about an 80% mortality rate. This is a horrible, horrible infection. The enteroviruses like polio and coronavirus. Measles is an RNA virus. HIV is an RNA virus. You say, well, why isn't there a HIV vaccine yet? Well, HIV is in fact more unstable than coronavirus. Back in the day when we were hearing a whole lot more about HIV, researchers would find 2, 3, 4 different strains of HIV in a single patient. That's how unstable the HIV virion is. But let's talk about coronavirus. We've been dealing with coronavirus for a very, very, very long time. Okay, we know it's one of the multiple winter viruses that infects people every single year with flu, rhinovirus, RSV, coronavirus, parainfluenza virus. There's a whole family of winter viruses that can give us colds or sicker every winter. What's different about coronavirus, and this coronavirus in particular, is a number of things. We're now 21 years into the 21st century, and we've had 5 major outbreaks. H1N1, SARS, MERS, Ebola, and now COVID-19. And it shouldn't be lost on anyone that 3 of the 5 outbreaks throughout the world in the first 20 years of the 21st century are coronavirus. SARS is coronavirus. Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, coronavirus. COVID-19, coronavirus. How many of you think within the next 10 years we'll have another outbreak with coronavirus? Well, I do. The good news, though, is that we know how to deal with this. And it takes knowledge, and it takes understanding, and it takes humility. We've had lots of epidemics in history. In 1955, is when the first polio epidemic really, really took place. and just for comparison, from the time we knew we were dealing with polio and what it was, how every summer people would get paralyzed and die, until the time we had a vaccine from Jonas Salk and Sabin from Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, respectively, 37 years between the first epidemic and the first vaccine. 37 years, not 10 months, 37 years, okay? And so we're in a miraculous age. You can go all the way through this, and I'll be glad to share this, Pastor Lyde, so folks can look at this in a little more detail, but lots and lots of epidemics. My point is, this is nothing new. Okay, this is nothing new. We've had epidemics before. We've had even pandemics before, certainly not as bad as this in my lifetime. We know how to deal with epidemics. All right, so here's the time for the pop quiz. You ready for this? All right, here goes. It's 10 questions, so stay with me. And I'm absolutely present. I'm looking at another screen. So you don't need a COVID-19 vaccine if you're young and healthy. True or false? I wish I had a way for y'all to vote. All right. Yeah, the answer is false. You absolutely need a COVID vaccine, young and healthy. Now, you certainly need it if you're in a vulnerable state, if you're in certain risk groups, but being young and healthy means absolutely nothing when it comes to coronavirus. Remember, it is a novel coronavirus. And what novel means is new. And what that means is, think about this. The human immune system has never encountered SARS-CoV-2 in the history of mankind. And so even if you've had, old school, some of us refer to as the OG coronavirus, the regular old coronavirus that was giving people colds in the past, SARS-CoV-2 is not that. Okay, it is not that. And so even if you're young and healthy, your immune response, not the virus, your immune response can make you sick unto death. And so you can either get natural immunity with a real infection, and most people will do okay with that, or you can be unlucky and get natural immunity that actually makes you very sick or even kills you. And so the purpose of the vaccine, as we'll talk about in a moment, is to give you enough immunity that does not make you sick and protects you from hospitalization and death. So even if you're young and healthy, you need a COVID-19 vaccine. Everyone in the US can get a COVID-19 vaccine for free. The caveat here is if you're eligible. So anyone who's getting charged for a COVID vaccine, you're in the wrong place. It's absolutely free, and you should not pay a penny. Okay, so everyone in the US can in fact get the COVID-19 vaccine when eligible for free. Okay, so even if folks charge you a penny, you're being overcharged. You can take over-the-counter pain medicines after you get the COVID-19 vaccine. True or false? Yeah, I hope you know already that that's true. Okay, and some doctors will recommend that you'll take Tylenol or Motrin or both, just to kind of deal with the immune response to the vaccine, because some people get a pretty robust immune response to the vaccine, and they can actually feel pretty badly. Some people have actually missed a day at work, that kind of thing. But you'd much rather have that than end up in the hospital or worse. Long-term side effects of COVID-19 vaccines are common. This is a controversial question, but there is a true-false answer here. So you know what your answer is. I'm going to give you the answer here. Long-term side effects are common, and the answer is false. We have had hundreds of millions of doses of COVID-19 vaccine, and we have had about 15,000 reports of side effects. You can do the math on that. And none of them are long-term, okay? And so we do know, however, that there are long-term effects from COVID-19. We know the short-term effects. It can put you in the hospital and it can kill you. But there are also long-term effects. You may have heard of long COVID, where folks are just not back to themselves cognitively. Their minds are foggy. They're de-energized. And so all of those are natural consequences of natural infection with COVID-19. You can still get the COVID-19 vaccine. You can still get COVID-19 even if you've received the COVID-19 vaccine. And the answer to this is true. It's true. You can still get infected In fact, you can even still spread the infection after getting vaccinated. And the reason for that is, remember, and this is an important point in general about vaccines, vaccines are developed, and we'll get into phases of clinical trials in a moment, but vaccines are developed for a specific reason: to prevent hospitalization and to prevent death. If the bug is not responsible for disability, hospitalization, and death, we generally don't make a vaccine for it, because, you know, a cold is annoying and you can miss a few days of work or a few days of school, but if it doesn't land you in the hospital or threaten your life, the energy to make a vaccine is not worth it. And so you can still get a COVID-19 or a COVID-19 infection after you get vaccinated, but the odds are extremely low. We know that the risk of getting infected is 4 times higher if you're not vaccinated, okay? So the risk of being infected is 4 times higher if you're not vaccinated. And the risk of dying, of course, is about 11 times higher if you're not vaccinated. And so very important to make sure you can get the vaccine. And remember, you can still get COVID-19 to some degree, although very, very, very rare if you've received the vaccine. Teenagers can get a COVID-19 vaccine, true or false? Yeah, hopefully you said true to that one, because that's been available for some time now. Unfortunately, only about half of eligible teenagers have taken the vaccine, and maybe later on you guys can tell me why. I honestly don't get it. COVID-19 vaccines are not recommended for pregnant people. I did a presentation on COVID-19 back in January, and the answer to this was true, because we didn't have data. Now we have months and months and months of data, and the answer to this is false. Pregnant women absolutely can get the COVID-19 vaccine. We also know that pregnant women in the 2nd and 3rd trimester are a high-risk group if they get COVID. If you can imagine, you have an infection in your lungs, you feel terrible. More than that, it's hard for you to breathe because your diaphragm can't move anymore like it needs to, because you have a baby there. And so you do not want to get you don't want to get the flu, you don't want to get any pneumonia, you absolutely don't want to get COVID-19 if you are pregnant. So if you're pregnant, you're debating it, talk to your healthcare provider, and please, if you're able to and if you qualify, please get the vaccine. You'd much rather get vaccinated immunity than natural immunity from COVID-19 if you're pregnant. COVID-19 vaccines affect fertility. A couple of us have probably heard that once or twice, and the answer to that is false. COVID-19 vaccines do absolutely nothing to fertility, and if you're thinking of using the vaccine as birth control, I would absolutely advise you against it. It doesn't work. It has nothing to do with fertility whatsoever. So that is a myth, that is misinformation. Please make it go away. Now, this is a hard one. This is a tough one. COVID-19, getting a COVID-19 vaccine can make you magnetic. I guess I would say if you aren't already magnetic, it's not going to make you magnetic. Sorry. So this is, again, a myth. This is misinformation. But, you know, a lot of people believe it, including some healthcare workers, some scientists actually thought it was real for a moment. It's not true. COVID-19 affects your DNA. Pfizer, Moderna, they're both messenger RNA vaccines. You can certainly hear people on social media and in other places talking about how COVID-19 can affect your DNA. It doesn't do that. The vaccine component that activates your immune system is extracellular, to use a scientific term. It doesn't go into the cell and modify your DNA. It just doesn't work like that. So, if you wanted to use it for that, it's not going to work. That's not how it works. It does not affect DNA whatsoever. So moving right along, I wanted to introduce 2 people to you. This is Jonas Salk. I don't know if he was a Pittsburgh fan or not, but he's certainly from Pittsburgh, and may have been a Steeler fan. I like to put that all together. And this is Dr. Katrina. I'm blocking on her last name all of a sudden, but she is one of the main researchers who believed years ago, almost 20 years ago, that we can stabilize RNA and use that stable RNA to make vaccine. The bottom line here is that she was kind of laughed at Her theories and ideas were dismissed. She could care less. She continued to do the research, continued to do her work, and it is her work that has laid the foundation for the messenger RNA vaccines that are saving people's lives. So I always mention her because I think someday in my lifetime or my children's lifetime, she will win the Nobel Prize in medicine because her siblings and her family can say she saved the world. So, stick by your stuff. So let's talk about how vaccines work. Again, hopefully you're not looking at this on a tiny screen. An antigen is the bug, whatever bug that might be. It's an existing pathogen. Your body will create an existing antibody, which is a protein that binds to that pathogen, to the virus, and then trains your immune system about how to dispose of that pathogen. And so if you have an existing pathogen, you have an existing antibody. If you've never seen that bug, your body may get ill, and in the process, you make antibody, and now you're protected from the subsequent infection. That's immune memory. And again, we are, in fact, fearfully and wonderfully made. If you have a new pathogen like SARS-CoV-2, there's no antibody. And so it has free reign on your body. It binds where it wants to bind, and it starts to hijack your cellular machinery and mass produce viruses. In addition, it allows you and uses you to infect and contaminate other people because you've never seen this bug in the past. And in fact, no one has until now. And so the way a vaccine works is you take a component of the SARS-CoV-2 virus called the spike protein, which is a tiny part of this very tiny virus, not the whole virus, not the RNA, just a tiny component, kind of a button on a jacket. And you use the technology that the scientist I just described to you uses and mass produce these buttons, if you may. It's used to create the vaccine. You get a small amount of that vaccine, and then your immune system recognizes the button, mass produces antibody, and protects you from the entire virus of SARS-CoV-2. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And one of the things that I find a little frustrating as a physician is one of the most incredible, miraculous discoveries of the 21st century has been maligned. It's unbelievable, right? I mean, our President Trump, however you feel about President Trump, knew their administration knew what they were dealing with and sanctioned 20 different scientific labs to come up with vaccines, against COVID-19, 20, because he knew that Pfizer couldn't vaccinate the world, Moderna couldn't vaccinate the world. And so our government, federal government, facilitated 20 different labs to study the effects on how to generate a vaccine to COVID-19. So kudos to that administration for the foresight to know that they were dealing with King Kong when it comes to this pandemic. And so now when we had the vaccine, I was a little bit puzzled because people said, oh, that was way too fast. And again, we can get into some of that in the question and answer period, but I looked at it and thought, thank you, Lord, this is amazing. We have a chance now. And then people, for whatever reason, still have hesitancy. Vaccines really work. For those of you who are looking at it on a tiny screen, this tells you that in the 20th century, annual morbidity, which is disability, and current estimates of vaccine preventable diseases. The annual morbidity, the amount of people disabled every year due to smallpox, was 29,000. This is a study from 2016. The number of cases of smallpox, frankly, for many, many years, is 0. If you take a look at this graph, smallpox, diphtheria, measles, mumps, your grandparents may know these diseases, and your great-grandparents may, in fact, tell you about these diseases, but you don't know these diseases, and your children won't know these diseases because of vaccines. They are highly, highly effective. Let's get to the truth then about clinical trials. And I'm just going to fly over this. We can get to the question and answer session and get into some details. But briefly, every single drug, when a vaccine is a drug, every single drug that makes it to production goes through the same exact formula every single time. A phase 1 trial asks the question, is it safe? Is it harmful or not? It doesn't ask the question whether it works, but just, is it safe to put in your body? That's the very first question. The second phase, if you find out that it's safe, you answer the second question, and that is it effective? Does it do anything? Does it do what you think it should do? That's a phase 2 trial. And before phase 1 and the phase 2 trial, some of the work is done in animals before it goes into humans. So with a phase 1 trial saying it's safe and a phase 2 trial saying it actually might work, a phase 3 trial actually takes that safe, effective data and distributes it to many, many, many more people. That's a phase 3 trial. That is kind of the key trial that everyone keeps their ear to the ground about. Because once the Food and Drug Administration gets 2 randomized control trials, those are phase 3 trials, then the FDA takes it before their organization, their governing body. They review the data. These are scientists who generally have no real dog in the fight, so to speak, who look at the data for what it is and make a determination that it is in fact safe, it is in fact effective, it in fact has had a successful phase 3 trial, and it needs to go into production. Now, what I don't have in here is emergency use authorization. And the EUA, or the emergency use authorization of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, made it, just so you know, it went through phase 1, went through phase 3, and had what many would consider an accelerated phase 3. And the reason it went through an accelerated phase 3, let me get into this a little bit. Usually you want at least a year for a randomized control vaccine trial. I'm sorry, 18 months, not a year, 18 months. And so with the 18-month window that we typically use for a phase 3 trial, there were simply too many people dying. And so with 12 months of data from 2 different very large trials, 30,000 people per study, it reached a point where it was unethical to continue the trial, knowing that 99% of the vaccinated people were not sick, nor getting hospitalized, nor dying. It was considered unethical to continue that study for another 6 months because the data would only get better. And so in 6 more months, you'd lose a lot more people. And so the FDA looked at the data and decided to do an emergency use authorization, and about 6 to 8 months later, gave it the full-blown FDA approval. That's the kind of accelerated pathway. And you can argue about their rationale and whether it was really ethical and should they have waited 6 more months to do a real phase 3 trial. In retrospect, no. We have 700,000 dead people. And frankly, if you could have reduced that number by 99%, wouldn't you want to? That's how I look at it. And so, and we know that it's very, very, very safe and it's highly effective. It is now in phase 4. Phase 4, and some drugs and some devices go through phase 4 trials, and that is even after the FDA approves it, it continues to monitor it so that more people and people who weren't necessarily qualified for the study because they're still going to get the drug can see. So for example, pregnant women were not in any of the original Pfizer or Moderna studies. Pregnant women are in the phase 4 studies because pregnant women went forward and said, I want to volunteer, I want to do this. So now we have data for pregnant women. And so now we know that pregnant women can actually take the vaccine. It is safe, it is effective. And we know that if you are unvaccinated and pregnant, your likelihood of dying is multiple times higher than a vaccinated pregnant woman. So that's the phases of a clinical trial. And I think it's important to just understand kind of how we think and talk about this. Most people, unless you do this on a regular basis, have no idea what we're talking about when we talk about phases of a clinical trial, emergency use authorization, and why we have to do such things. The other thing I wanted to share with you in a little more detail is a vaccine development roadmap. The idea of putting a drug into a human being is imagine, very, very, very big deal. You can't just do that. And so the company or the university or whoever's developing the vaccine has to do an investigational new drug application to the FDA. It's a very lengthy application, as you can imagine, with lots and lots of detail. The vaccine has to go through clinical trials before it's even licensed. And many of the vaccines at this point they're not even named anything. They're numbers and letters. And then they have to apply, if this is solid, they have to apply for what's called a BLA, a biologicals license application. Because if you're going to put a drug into a human being, it better be safe. It has to be effective. Okay, that is the clinical standard. And so that's the BLA. And then the FDA and other organizations actually inspect the manufacturing facility. Most people aren't aware of that. So you can tell us that your house is clean, but we're going to come and see and make sure it's clean, because you're putting a drug into a human being. And so these are some of the steps necessary before you get a full vaccine acceptation. And so the findings are then presented to the FDA or VRBAC. And finally, there's usability testing and product labeling. And so this is a shortcut. This is an abbreviated roadmap to vaccine development. And the point I'm making here is, when people say that it happened too quickly, it may have happened too quickly for you based on kind of what you expected. But believe me, there were folks who were doing the hustle to get this done. They didn't skip any steps. They stopped doing other things. Okay, they stopped doing other things and devoted all of their energy to finding an effective and safe vaccine. And so that's why it happened so fast. If everyone kind of twiddled their thumbs and said, well, I'll get to developing a COVID vaccine when I can, my lab is busy, we would still be waiting on a vaccine. So I will tell you, researchers stopped what they were doing, dropped everything, and focused exclusively on COVID-19 vaccine development. And that's how we got to where we are. So where does vaccine hesitancy come from? Boy, oh boy. I showed you the slide a few slides ago, and basically what it showed is 10 historically fatal diseases have been eliminated for the most part from the general population because of vaccines. And, we can take it for granted, right? Because we are rich in America. You say, well, bro, I'm not that rich. You're in America, you are rich. Here's a fact. 80% of the world has not received a single vaccine, 80%. And so in America, we debate the third dose. There are people in other countries who are going, bro, I haven't even had my first dose. And I lost my mother, my grandmother, half my village. But here we are in the United States debating whether we should or not. And again, that's kind of the nature of our culture. I'm not, criticizing that one way or the other. I'm just putting it in perspective. 80% of humanity has yet to receive their first dose, and their countries are being decimated by COVID-19. So where does the vaccine hesitancy come from? All over the place. It's on social media. There's misinformation, because frankly, there's always been misinformation. And you have to learn how to critically evaluate facts, right? Separating truth from error. That's what we're kind of called to do. Fraud, because frankly, there's money to be made. One of my favorite lines that helps me to identify when I'm about to be lied to is when someone says, here's what doctors aren't telling you. Immediately they're going to end by asking for money, right? And so there's always fraud, always going to be misinformation. And so you just got to bob and weave and stay out of the way from that stuff. Religion can certainly get in the way and create vaccine hesitancy. We've had patients say that, getting tested for COVID, not the vaccine, getting tested for COVID is against their religion. Being tested is against their religion. And my question for you, if that's your position, is COVID-19 is 20 months old, which would imply to me that your religion is 20 months old, is a brand new religion, this novel religion, right? And so people use religion as excuse, right? And so you have to be careful when you start to blend that stuff, because it falls short after a while. Authentic fear. People are just afraid. It's new. And all the reasons that we've talked about. Authentic ignorance. And when I say ignorant, I don't mean oppositional with a bad attitude. I mean not knowing. Some people just don't know, which is why tonight I've talked about microbiology, and I've talked about vaccine development, and I've talked about clinical trials, right? Because we know our people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So now you have knowledge. And if you didn't know, now you know. And betrayal. And I put betrayal at the bottom because the facts can be the facts, but if any of you have been betrayed or lied to or misinformed by people in authority or taken advantage of by someone in authority, then you know what I mean when I say that betrayal creates generational trauma. You know, it's been said that between the Hatfields and the McCoys, they don't know where it started, but they don't like each other. Generational trauma is real, and you can ignore it at your own risk. And so we have to talk about Tuskegee, particularly as it pertains to public health and African Americans in the 21st century. There are people who may or may not know the details of the Tuskegee experiment, but what they know is that Black people were taken advantage of by the federal government, and that is a fact. So here are the facts. In 1932, the US Public Health Service engaged the Tuskegee Institute in Macon, Alabama, in the US Public Health Service Tuskegee Syphilis Study. This was a study done on incarcerated African-American men to study the natural history of syphilis. Now, syphilis is caused by a bacteria. Syphilis also happens to not only cause venereal disease, but followed over time will damage your skin and is how we say in medicine, neurotropic. Syphilis has a predilection for the brain. And so if you don't treat it, there is inevitable brain damage. In the mid-40s, we discovered that penicillin actually can cure and treat syphilis. But for those incarcerated African-American men in prison, the US government withheld penicillin. In 1972, the Associated Press released an article that described what was going on in the Tuskegee Institute and in the prison. And I have to tell you, it says the study ends on a recommendation of an ad hoc advisory panel convened by the Assistant Secretary for Health and Scientific Affairs. I would encourage you to go to the CDC website and read about the evolution of this problem. Because what happened is the Associated Press early in the year released about the study. Folks were outraged about it. A letter was sent to the Assistant Secretary for Health and Scientific Affairs who said, not that big a deal. We get it, and did nothing. That was around in July. And then in October, it was escalated and the Public Health Service shut it down. And so in 1997, President Clinton issued a formal presidential apology around regarding Tuskegee and what happened to those men. So this was awful. And, you know, the natural response to injustice should be outrage and anger. And so when people say to me, Dr. Forbes, I have no interest in getting a vaccine created by this government that has taken advantage of Black people in Tuskegee and in many, many, many other ways, I completely get it. But my response to you is this: COVID-19, the pandemic, and getting vaccinated is not that. In the Tuskegee study, the federal government withheld treatment when they knew better. For COVID-19 and this vaccine, you're withholding treatment from yourself, and you should know better. The mortality rate for African Americans for COVID-19 is 3 times higher than in non-African Americans. Think about that. For every 1 death of a non-African American, there are 3 Black people in this country who will die. And we know that 97% of them are not vaccinated. So when we talk about public health and private choices, recognize that if things were bad before the pandemic, they are worse today. And in September of 2021, we have options. And so my appeal to you, I implore you, think twice about staying unvaccinated and take this thing seriously. It's not just for you, but it's for your whole community, because you can be infected. And we know this. We know that if you infect 100 people, 80 of them will never know they were infected. We know that 4 of them, or 4% of them, will end up in the hospital, and 1% of them will die. We know that if you're not vaccinated, the likelihood of you getting infected is 4 times higher than a vaccinated person. And you're 11 times more likely to die if you're unvaccinated. And so we know now, this isn't March of 2020, when we were wondering if we should wear masks or all of this distancing stuff, physical distancing. This is not that. This is now September of 2021. We're deep into this thing. And we're on our 4th wave with the Delta wave. There's the Mu variant coming up through the Southwest. There's that B1 variant that's also making a difference in Florida. Folks, this is real. And when I mentioned an alien invasion earlier, that's exactly what this is. They're not big and ugly. They're 100 microns, but they're still ruining our people, ruining our country. And it's up to us to make different public health choices. So, our mantra in healthcare, we have lots of them. This is one of them: prevent what's preventable, right? I mean, for all we know, anyone in this room can have cancer or some other kind of disease that we're not even aware of. But there are things that we can prevent. And so how do we prevent this? We know how to prevent this. It's really effective. Vaccinate if you're eligible. Maintain your distance. 6 feet really matters, right? Mask when other people are around you. Yeah, wear a mask. Early on again, last spring, wear a mask, not wear a mask, that debate's over. You need a mask if you have another human being near you. And keep your hands clean. This is my last slide, and I'd like to open it up for our question and answer period. And thank you again, Dr. Lyde and family, for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Forbes. Let us hear it for him, whether you're doing so with an emoji, whether you're doing so with a hand clap on video, whether you're putting a comment in on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. I think that this teaching was so outstanding that we should not be quiet.
Thank you, brother.
And we are really grateful for you taking the time out to educate us and to do so with such excellence. This was not only great information in terms of content, but the presentation was stellar. You taught in a way that was accessible, and I think it was incredibly persuasive. And so we're really blessed by it.
Thank you.
Reverend Denise Walker is going to come to us in a second, but I do want to say this one thing. It's a plug because Dr. Forbes is going to continue the series. So he will be joining us again in future weeks. There's 3 sessions that he will be leading. And so I want you to put this on your calendar for the next few Thursdays, because as a people, as a community, we need to continue to be well informed. And I'm going to ask that everyone also take whatever platform that you have to also encourage others to join us so that we're all on the same page, because it's one thing for each of us to be well informed and in good health, but it's also important that we bear the responsibility for others' well-being as well, because this is a public health concern. And before I turn things over to Dr. Forbes, I also want to say this too. This is a small world because I'm from Brooklyn, and you have a relative from Brooklyn, don't you?
I sure do.
Yeah.
My whole family's in Brooklyn.
Yes. And there's a relative of yours named Chris Forbes.
I think he's in the room.
Yes, he is. And so we
How about that?
We grew up together around the corner. He used to beat me up on the basketball court.
What?
Yeah, he's a good ball player. He was a good ball player.
He had a good jumper. Yep.
Yeah. But I did want to say that it's a really small world. And so Thank you again.
That's awesome.
Thank you again. So Reverend Denise, lead us, if you will, and those who have questions, we're ready to take them.
Oh, praise the Lord. Excellent, exceptional presentation tonight. Please don't let this opportunity pass you by. If you have any questions, I see there is one question already, Dr. Forbes, in the chat. And it's explain the controversy among professionals regarding hydroxychloroquine, and other treatments?
Great question. Thanks for asking that. So when Dr. Marek, Philip Marek, M-A-R-E-K, if you want to Google him, who is a world-renowned adult critical care specialist whose bibliography is absolutely phenomenal. One of the world's leading critical care scientists first came out with the finding that hydroxychloroquine may make a difference in COVID-19. You can imagine everyone jumped on it and everyone started using it because he was a number of reasons. Let me set the stage a little better than that. I mentioned earlier that it's a novel virus. We've never seen it before. And the things that it was doing to people, we had never seen before. You may remember the incredibly high mortality rate early on because we literally did not know what we were doing. Now, in the pediatric world, I must say, with the Alpha variant, we saw very little pediatric COVID disease. We were spared. We were geared up for it. We were all ready for it. And because of all the mitigation efforts, the masking, the hand washing, and all that, we saw very little COVID. We saw very little flu. We saw very little RSV. Most of you in this call probably didn't have a cold last year, honestly, because the mitigation efforts are so effective. And so we jumped right on hydroxychloroquine. And there were others that we jumped on that didn't make the news because people in Europe, we use Twitter, we use Facebook. I mean, the medical community really did an amazing job of coming together to say, hey, I tried vitamin C and hydrocortisone and thiamine and multivitamins, and my patient got better. And so we're like, that sounds harmless, let's use it. And so one, it was Philip Marek, who again is on the Mount Rushmore of critical care research. And two, it was harmless. Hydroxychloroquine in regular doses is pretty harmless. So we felt we had nothing to lose and patients were dying. So everyone used it. But we did what scientists do, and that is we subjected it to a randomized control clinical trial. And when we did a randomized control clinical trial, we found it was safe, right? Phase 1, effective. It hit the ground like a stone, didn't do anything. And so multiple groups in Spain and Switzerland and Japan, Italy, United States, all tried to frankly make it work because people were dying at such a high rate and we just couldn't get past phase 2. And so as exciting as it may have been in Dr. Marek's ICU, maybe there was something else about the care of the nursing care or some other, who knows what it was, but it wasn't hydroxychloroquine. And so we were all disappointed. Believe me when I tell you, we wanted it to work. We kept trying it over and over and over. It just doesn't do anything for COVID-19. So.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. For that explanation. I just want to remind anyone that's in Facebook, if you have any questions as well, please type them and we will get to them. Here are a couple of other questions.
Sure.
Sorry, my screen isn't acting right. Are there any particular vitamins and or health routines that you would suggest to maintain our health?
Yeah, great question. Now, I don't know if that's a COVID-19 question or a general question about viruses. If it's a COVID-19 question, the answer to that is no. Believe me, we've tried. I mentioned thiamine, vitamin A. We're looking. None of them seem to make a difference as far as when you get COVID-19. As far as preventing COVID-19, the answer is the same. The multivitamins do not appear to be helpful in preventing COVID-19. If you want to compare it to standard measures like wearing a mask, washing your hands, keeping your distance. If the question is vitamins in general to maintain your health, if vitamins may be beneficial if you don't eat a regular diet or if you suffer from malnutrition. If you eat a regular diet and you don't suffer from malnutrition, vitamin supplements are, how candid can I be?
Be candid.
They're a waste of money. They're harmless, but they're not harmless to your pocketbook. So the other thing that we like to say is that there's an opportunity cost to multivitamins. One, you're using your money, and you shouldn't. But two, that you're telling yourself it's helping you, and you can be spending your energy on something that actually helps you. So the opportunity cost of using multivitamins is that they're useless and they're wasting your time, and that's the opportunity cost. So again, they're harmless. If you want to do it, knock yourself out, but it doesn't really do anything.
Thank you. We have a question from some of our Facebook viewers. If you had COVID and you get vaccinated, how strong of an immunity do you have?
Great question. So there's some early evidence. I'm going to share my screen again. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, it's almost like a plant. So here's a slide that I had made when this came out. I kind of do this when the different literature comes out. So the question here for me was, why get vaccinated after natural infection? Now, natural infection works. We have some evidence that there is long-term immunity really at the level of the bone marrow, not just in circulating white blood cells, but you have kind of a repository of immunity to COVID-19 after natural infection, which is great news. But here is a study that just came out of Kentucky. And what they did is they found that by using public records, which you can say there are limitations to this study, and I put it here so that you can look it up yourself and read it for yourself. But what they basically did was they followed people who were vaccinated and unvaccinated after natural immunity. And what they found is those who were vaccinated, let's put it the other way, those who were unvaccinated were 2.2 times more likely to get reinfected than the vaccinated. And so there's also some evidence that suggests, I don't want to use this term, but this is the term that the researchers used, was super immune. So there's this idea that if you have natural immunity to COVID and you get the vaccine, and again, unproven, you may be immune for a very long time and immune against upcoming variants. And so, if I had natural immunity to COVID, which I don't think I did, I definitely took the vaccine. But if I had natural immunity because I got infected, I would still get the vaccine. The vaccine is very effective, it's harmless, and it may in fact protect you from variants down the road. Again, those are theoretical. We were still waiting for that data to come in. But this observation out of Kentucky was pretty compelling, that after natural immunity, if you get vaccinated, it protects you to the order of about 2.5 times, almost 2.5 times more than those that didn't get vaccinated after natural immunity. So the jury is still out, but there's certainly no harm, and there's some evidence that it may be beneficial to be vaccinated anyway.
Thank you. Another question from one of our Facebook viewers. When getting a flu shot, what is the length of time you need to receive your COVID vaccine?
Yeah, it turns out you can probably get them both at the same time. Yep. So.
Good question.
Yep.
Okay, another one. Why is COVID less impactful in African versus Europe and Asia?
What does that mean, less impactful? I guess that's what they say.
Okay, can the person typing this, can they explain what they mean? And while you're doing that, let me move on to another question.
Okay.
Can alkaline water make a difference?
Yeah, great. In what, in COVID? I guess presumably COVID.
I guess presumably, yeah.
Yeah, again, that's been looked at too. The alkaline water is very interesting because if you look at the biological premise behind alkaline water, it's terrific. It sounds like it should work like in a dish. When you put it to the test with studies and humans, it doesn't seem to make a difference at all. So right now it's in the same category as like multivitamins.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, lots of claims. You'll read lots of claims about not vitamin water, but alkaline water, lots of claims about multivitamins, not a lot of evidence.
Sure, thank you. I apologize, I skipped over a question. Someone was asking, can you recently tell if you had COVID? Like what could possibly be some of the symptoms, I guess, to indicate that you've had the disease?
Yeah, good question. Good, especially going into the winter. So most people who get infected have no symptoms at all. Those who get symptoms tend to get cold symptoms. And probably one of the more famous symptoms is loss of taste and smell. But again, most people have no symptoms at all. And the most common types of symptoms are cold symptoms: fever, stuffy nose, coughing, maybe wheezing. So it just looks like a cold most of the time.
Okay. Do you recommend having surgeries and keeping appointments during this time, since so many people are afraid of going to the hospital?
Yeah, good question. Boy, that's a great question, actually. The short answer is yes. So those of us in the system recognize that we have never wavered from our commitment to quality and safe care. We've rearranged our workflow. We're dealing with an incredible workforce shortage. There's a huge amount of job openings in the United States, at tens of millions right now. And the healthcare sector has the largest amount of job openings of all the sectors. So if you're interested in working, jump into the healthcare sector, we're going to hire you. But what we've had to do is change how we do what we do. We don't want to burn out our staff, and we don't want to put patients at risk. And so we're creating new workflows, leveraging technology, doing all of those things to make sure we can still deliver safe, effective care. We do have rules when you come to the hospital, right? Wear your mask, wash your hands, keep your distance, get vaccinated. But as far as, doing surgery and going to see your regular appointments, again, you can be safe, because we know even if you're not vaccinated, and we want you to be vaccinated, the mitigation strategies work, right? Wash your hands, keep your distance, wear your mask while you're at the doctor.
Okay, this is another good question. And I would like to ask if Pastor Lyde or even Minister Wimberly, some of the questions that I might have missed, I'm having a bit of an issue with my computer. If you can help me out with those questions. But here's a question off of Facebook. This viewer is saying he recently had COVID in March. He got both of the vaccine shots, but he just recently lost his taste and smell again. Can this symptom keep reoccurring with him, and will it ever stop?
Yeah, great question. Folks have described that after natural infection with COVID. And it does wax and wane for some people. I don't know if it'll ever stop. It's probably too early to tell, unfortunately. It's one of those long-term effects of natural infection, natural immunity.
Great.
This is a question from another viewer on Facebook. It is, if you had COVID and you get vaccinated, how strong of an immunity do you have?
Yeah, good question. We do believe from some of the data we're getting back is that your immunity is quite enhanced. Natural immunity is very effective, as I mentioned earlier. Most people who get infected don't even get sick. So it's very effective. And if you amplify that with a vaccine, you're even more protected, particularly because the virus keeps morphing from one strain to another. So again, if you've been naturally infected and you're naturally immune, I would encourage you to still get the vaccine.
Great. A question on our Zoom from a viewer. Of the 20 labs the government tasked with creating vaccines, are there any other treatments in the pipeline?
Treatments, there are monoclonal antibodies that we don't use enough. Right now we have antivirals. Remdesivir is one of the drugs that we use, and we also, as I mentioned, use monoclonal antibodies. Now, the monoclonal antibodies are against the spike protein, and so this is an IV version of that protein antibody that would bind to the virus and hopefully prevent, well, not hopefully, we have data, prevents worsening of disease. It's now recommended for high-risk groups. So over 65, sickle cell disease, very bad asthma, people at home on ventilators, folks that already are at risk because of their health. If they start to get any symptoms of COVID-19, the recommendation is get tested. And if you're positive, then you get the monoclonal antibody, and it reduces hospitalization and worsening.
Great.
Here's a question from someone on Zoom. Uh, can you tell if you've had COVID previously?
Other than a test, no.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do a blood test for COVID too. So it's not just a nasal swab. We can actually check your blood to see if you're immune.
Okay, I think this one viewer on Zoom is saying regarding the African and Europe and Asia outbreaks, it seems to be that there are fewer outbreaks in those countries as opposed to the United States. Can you answer why is that?
Yeah, I can only speculate why, and that is true. I think there are a number of reasons that folks have put forward. One is the social restraints are much more pervasive in many parts of Africa than in the United States. Some of the measures that they've taken just wouldn't fly here in the United States. Plus, as I like to say about us as Americans, we're the don't tread on me people, right? So you start telling us what to do, we're not having it. In many parts of Africa and parts of African culture, when there is these types of restraints, people comply. And if they don't comply, they're pretty serious. They've incarcerated people who don't wear masks, right? So I don't know how that's going to work in the United States. It probably wouldn't, but they're very serious about it because, again, this is the nation that experienced a lot of adversity and Ebola, right? And so the mortality rate in many African countries is very, very high. And so folks don't live into their old age. And so there's a lot of cultural reasons why those measures that we used last year that we know are very effective are still highly effective in Africa. My concern about it as well, or to give you one more reason, is some of the recording. There's not a Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for every nation in Africa, right? And so there's probably some degree of underreporting. And so what we do and what the CDC and the World Health Organization does is they look at their overall mortality rates. And so if there's a spike in mortality during the pandemic, it's likely attributable to COVID. So.
Wow. One other question, do you advocate the current trend of companies terminating people not vaccinated?
Do I advocate it? Yeah, that's the question. Yeah, that's a personal question, and it would probably be cowardly of me not to answer that. But I'll give you some context. I just mentioned that we're the don't tread on me culture, right? And so there's a part of me that really struggles with the idea of mandating anything. Secondly, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this, public health is about private choices. But where I think people have made a mistake here is public health and private choices are what they are. And you have the right to your choice. But my opinion as a physician is not when it comes to communicable diseases. So you do not have a right to not mask and avoid me when you have the flu. You should not be around me when you are contagious, because I may be fine, but I have friends, and some of you are on this call, that if I, as an asymptomatic flu carrier, shakes your hand or hugs you like I'm inclined to, that could be the beginning of the end for you. And so when it comes to communicable diseases, I don't believe we have the right to do what we want. When it comes to communicable diseases, you have the right, as an American, you have the right to do whatever you want. And here's the end, your employer has the right to do whatever they want too. You make choices and your employer makes choices. And folks may disagree with your choice. Folks may disagree with your employer's choice. But your choices have consequences and your employer's choices have consequences. And I respect your right to do what you want. And I respect the rights of your employer to terminate you if you don't do what they say.
I have two other questions from Facebook. One is, what are the types of masks to be worn? And then the second one is, how does the vaccine affect those with heart conditions?
Yeah, good question there. I'll answer the mask one first. The best mask you can use these days is a surgical mask. We say like a level 2 mask. We don't, even a level 1 is good enough, but a multi-layered mask these days is what's been advocated. Do you need an N95? If you can, of course, get an N95. But if you can't get an N95, a multi-layered mask, ideally with not cloth. If you have to use cloth, you use cloth, but as many layers as possible is the best strategy these days. Oh, and about heart. The vaccine for most people, with the exception of adolescent males, appears to have zero negative impact on the heart. In the teenage studies, the teenage studies for the COVID vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, there was a blip in the data that suggested that once the young men were vaccinated, their immune system recognized what are called epitopes, or antigen sites on the heart that look just like the spike protein. So that similarity biologically caused their immune system to irritate their hearts. It's called myocarditis. And so we know that in adolescent males who had the vaccine, there was this spike. The number of young men who were affected did not appear to be any different statistically than in the placebo group, but it was enough of a spike that the FDA mandated a longer duration for the clinical trials for children.
Let's hear it one more time for Dr. Forbes, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Oh, thank you all. Thank you so much. And we want to also express our gratitude to Reverend Denise Walker for her facilitation and for coordination for tonight. And as well, I want to just invite for a quick second Dr. Monica Reese, who's the executive director of the BTC Center, if she wouldn't mind just coming in for a quick second, just to show her face and maybe say a few words.
Okay, thank you so much, Pastor. So about showing my face, I have to be honest. I'm sitting here in PJs. I'm just being, I'm sorry. I won't.
Fair enough.
But thank you so much, Dr. Forbes. This was a wonderful presentation. It was a wonderful kickoff to our Healthy Living series. And I have to thank Reverend Denise Walker. I can't thank her enough. We can't thank her enough. She's doing such a wonderful job in assisting and coordinating. She's a project leader for this series. And again, we're so appreciative and thank you so much for being willing to be our leading speaker and kicking us off. And then you've agreed to come back again. So thank you, sir. We're very appreciative. Yeah.
It's been my great pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
So again, I'm going to encourage everyone this time next week, and we will also continue the series out for a few weeks beyond that. And then there are also other opportunities. Not only does the BTC Center have a number of programs that are forthcoming, but as well, Baptist Temple Church is doing some programming that we think will be helpful to the community as well. We're trying to sort of break the normal boundaries of Christian education and really get into education that is a bridge from scriptures and how to live to some practical ways from experts how to live. So Reverend Denise, why don't you just do a little quick plug, if you will, in addition to this series with Dr. Forbes.
Amen. Praise the Lord. In addition to this series, as Pastor already stated, we do have other sessions coming up with Dr. Michael Forbes. The next date will be October 7th, and then we will close out on October 14th with Dr. Forbes. Excuse me, I'm trying to get all these dates together. These are going to be very exciting topics that Dr. Forbes will discuss. You don't want to miss them. We're going to be speaking about weight management, blood pressure management, mental health. So we want to invite everyone to please come out, be a part of that. If you have any questions or concerns, you can ask at that point in time. We do have on October 16th for women only a domestic violence seminar that's going to be an in-person event, and we're encouraging all the women. If you need more information, please contact our church 412-241-1624, or you can reach out to me for more information regarding that. In addition to those other sessions and the things that we're talking about, on October 23rd, we will be having a flu and COVID booster vaccination clinic, in addition to blood pressure screening clinics for that day. We're going to be partnering with Alma Illery, and that we're excited about that because that's also a friend of Dr. Michael Forbes and I, Dr. Jerome Glosser, who's going to be partnering with us along with Rite Aid and Bethany Christian Ministry. So we want to encourage you to please support us that day. That's October 23rd. That's an in-person. We ask that anyone who would like to get their booster vaccination, those over the age of 65 and those that are immunocompromised will be eligible for that, but you must register. So please contact the church or myself again, but I would prefer that you contact the church for registration for this event. Also, I think that's it, Pastor. If I'm forgetting anything, or maybe perhaps Gail or Minister Wimberly, some of the things that we discussed, if you can think of anything, I hope I'm not forgetting anything. Help me out here. You have to come up.
No.
Okay, Pastor, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think you might have covered it. I think you might have covered it. James, is there anything? Just nod or shake your head. There's nothing else.
Okay, great.
All right. So thank you again, Dr. Forbes, and we'll see you again. We're planning for October 7th. But we will have a session at this time next week. Nonetheless, Dr. Forbes will be coming back on the 7th, but we will have a session on next Thursday. Thank you all for attending, and we pray you continue. If you want more information about the BTC Center Incorporated, you can find them on the Facebook page, BTC Center Incorporated. You can also find the Facebook page at the Baptist Temple Church. Everyone have a blessed night, and we pray that this has been a wonderful and worthwhile occasion.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Yes, good night. Pastor, do you want me to hang around? Is there anything else as we're logging people out? We're good.